She was asleep in row 10, her head leaning against the window, lost in a haze of fatigue from a grueling week. The hum of the engines was almost hypnotic, and the soft dim of the cabin lights made it feel like nothing could touch her. That is, until the captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Is there any combat pilot on board?" Instantly, the cabin erupted in murmurs and anxious glances. She shot upright, heart pounding. Memories she had buried for years, the missions, the adrenaline, the scars that no one could see, flooded back. This was no ordinary flight. Something was wrong, very wrong. Passengers around her were panicking, but she could feel her instincts kicking in. She had trained for emergencies that made ordinary fears pale in comparison. The captain's voice came again, more urgent this time. "We have a critical situation. Any pilot, please respond immediately." She took a deep breath and stood, her uniform hidden under a casual jacket, her presence suddenly commanding attention. People stared as she made her way to the cockpit, her steps measured but determined. Inside, the co-pilot's hands were shaking, and the first officer looked pale as he explained that one of the engines had suffered a catastrophic failure, leaving them dangerously low over the ocean. She assessed the instruments in seconds, calculating wind, fuel, and glide path with military precision. The calm that came over her was electric, decades of training distilled into a single moment of clarity. "Step aside," she said quietly but firmly. "I've got this." The passengers watched in awe as she took control, her hands steady on the controls, eyes scanning every indicator like a hawk. The turbulence outside grew worse, but inside the cockpit, she orchestrated a ballet of calculated maneuvers, guiding the plane toward the nearest airfield. The tension was palpable, each second stretching like hours, but her focus never wavered. Somewhere deep inside, she felt a strange thrill, a mixture of fear, skill, and destiny, realizing that sometimes the world only notices you when everything is on the line. And as the coastline finally appeared on the horizon, a quiet determination settled over her. Surviving this would change everything, not just for her, but for everyone aboard. Underscore 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 underscore. If you want, I can continue the next part where the tension escalates as she executes a daring landing, keeping it cinematic and gripping for your audience. Do you want me to continue it? The roar of the engines was deafening now, each shudder of the aircraft echoing like a warning. Sweat beaded on her forehead, but her hands remained steady. The co-pilot, frozen in disbelief, could only mutter, "I didn't think anyone could." She cut him off with a sharp glance. "Focus. We land, then we deal with the rest." Outside, storm clouds gathered, black and foreboding, their jagged outlines illuminated by occasional flashes of lightning. Visibility was dropping fast, and every instrument was screaming urgency. She toggled switches, ran checklists from memory, and recalculated descent angles in real time. Years of simulator drills and actual combat sorties converged in her mind, as if she were reliving every near-death moment she'd survived. But now, the stakes were multiplied by dozens of innocent lives. The passengers had grown silent, every eye on her as she navigated. Some clutched hands or whispered prayers, others simply stared, transfixed by the calm aura that seemed to radiate from her. A child near the back leaned into their mother, whispering, "Is she a superhero?" She caught the snippet over the intercom as she adjusted the throttle, and for a fleeting second, a tight, almost imperceptible smile crossed her lips. The first officer spoke again, his voice shaky but trying to regain composure. "We're over the ocean. Closest landing is about 30 minutes, but with one engine." He stopped, unable to continue.
She didn't need him to.
She had already calculated the optimal glide path, factoring in wind shear, weight distribution, and the uneven thrust of the remaining engine. Every move had to be precise. One miscalculation could send the plane into the waves. "Everyone, brace for turbulence," she said over the intercom, her voice calm, almost soothing. There was a ripple of tension through the cabin as people gripped their seats. Then, just as abruptly, the aircraft lurched violently. The wingtip dipped, and a wave of panic threatened to ripple through the cabin. She countered immediately, her muscles straining, adjusting trim and thrust with the fluidity of a dancer. Memories of her first combat sortie surged unbidden, being in a cockpit as explosions tore across the sky, learning to trust instincts above all else. Here, the same principle applied, though the stakes were different. Lives were not abstract targets, but flesh and blood. She allowed herself no room for error, only calculation, instinct, and precision. Lightning forked across the sky, momentarily blinding, and the plane shuddered again, but she held it steady, guiding the massive machine like a marionette on invisible strings. The clouds thinned just enough to reveal a sliver of coastline below, a narrow ribbon of tarmac cutting across the earth. Her pulse quickened, not with fear, but with the rush of controlled adrenaline. She had one shot. One perfect approach. The autopilot had been disengaged long ago. This was manual, every decision entirely hers. She adjusted flaps, checked altimeters, coordinated rudder input, and whispered quick calculations under her breath. The engine's growl was uneven, coughing at irregular intervals, a reminder that any moment could spell disaster. She ignored it. Focus was her ally. Panic was not. Behind her, the co-pilot finally found his voice. "You really are. I've never seen." She shook her head, cutting him off again. "Not now. Keep your eyes on me, and help where I need it. Nothing else matters." The man nodded, snapping into a professional mode that belied his earlier terror. The runway approached like a lifeline, narrow and impossibly precise. Gusts of wind buffeted the fuselage, and she adjusted constantly, micro-corrections that only someone with exacting skill could perform. The plane tilted, dipped, and she countered with uncanny precision. Her hands were steady, her mind a machine of strategy and instinct. She could see the end, she could almost touch it. Time seemed suspended. Every second stretched infinitely as she lined up the landing. The landing gear had to deploy, and she executed the maneuver with meticulous care, each sequence checked twice, thrice, in a rhythm that had saved her in more hostile skies. The engines protested, the cabin groaned, but the plane obeyed her commands as if acknowledging its pilot. Finally, she saw it. The runway directly ahead, the strip of safety glowing faintly under storm-shadowed skies. She whispered a silent prayer, not to any god, but to herself and to the countless hours of training, hoping every calculation held true. She guided the aircraft lower, lowering the nose just enough, adjusting throttle, easing the wingtip against turbulence. The tires kissed the asphalt with a bone-rattling thud, the plane skidding just enough to remind everyone of the danger they had skirted. She applied reverse thrust, keeping control, ensuring a straight glide down the slick runway. Water sprayed from the tarmac, but she held it steady, coaxing the plane to a complete stop. A silence fell. The passengers, frozen in tension for what felt like an eternity, began to breathe again. Applause and cries erupted, but she barely registered them. She was already scanning systems, making sure nothing else was amiss. Her body relaxed in increments, each small release of tension a reward, though her mind never fully ceased its vigilance. The captain, pale but relieved, looked at her with a mixture of awe and gratitude. I don't know what to say," he stammered. She shook her head. "No need. You called. I answered. That's all." The passengers began to emerge from their seats, faces filled with shock, relief, and admiration. Some rushed to her, offering thanks, tears streaming, while others simply stared, trying to process what had just occurred. The news crew, already alerted by the airline, would later call it a miraculous landing, but she didn't care for accolades. In her mind, it had been a calculated, precise, dangerous operation. Nothing miraculous, only skill, instinct, and resolve. As she stepped out of the cockpit, The rain had stopped, leaving a heavy, misty calm over the tarmac. The sky, once threatening, was now a muted gray, almost serene. She allowed herself a deep breath, feeling the exhaustion that had been masked by adrenaline finally seep through her bones. The passengers, now gathered outside, called her name. Some were shaking, others crying, all of them transformed by the ordeal. She smiled faintly, a rare expression breaking through her otherwise steely exterior. The world had witnessed her skill, but she had done what any trained pilot would have done. Nothing more, nothing less. A small child ran forward, clutching a drawing of an airplane with a tiny figure at the helm. "You saved us," the child whispered, eyes wide. She knelt down, taking the drawing gently. "We saved each other," she said softly, handing it back. That simple exchange felt more meaningful than any praise, any headline, any accolade. Even as paramedics and emergency crews surrounded the plane, checking every passenger, she felt a strange detachment, the calm after a storm. She had returned everyone safely to the ground, yet the flight, the danger, the tension had left a permanent mark. Somewhere deep inside, she knew this landing would be remembered, not as a feat of luck, but as a demonstration of what one disciplined, focused individual could do in a moment when everything hung in the balance. The captain approached her again, offering a handshake this time, sincere and respectful. "I owe you my career and maybe more," he said. She nodded, simply replying, "Just make sure everyone gets home safely." And even as the passengers were led to safety, as cameras captured the aftermath, and as reporters began lining up for interviews, she knew that the story was far from over. Something about the events of this flight hinted at challenges yet unseen, threats that might not announce themselves so clearly. She glanced back at the aircraft, her mind already racing, already calculating. The world had seen a landing. She had seen a mission and a beginning. The plane sat on the tarmac, engines now silent, yet the air remained charged with a tension that refused to dissipate. The passengers had disembarked, some still trembling, some laughing in disbelief, and some staring into the distance, trying to make sense of what they had just lived through. For them, it had been a brush with mortality. For her, it was a reminder of the fragility of life and the extraordinary power of focus and courage when everything else fails. She walked slowly along the wet tarmac, the mist clinging to her jacket, each step measured, deliberate. People approached, some shaking her hand, others offering whispered thanks, but her mind was already elsewhere, scanning the horizon, calculating the what-ifs that only someone like her could see. She didn't need recognition. The satisfaction of control, the thrill of having steered 100 souls away from certain danger, was reward enough. A reporter ran forward, voice urgent, camera flashing. "Ma'am, everyone is calling this miraculous. How did you—" She held up a hand, letting the words fall into the wind. She didn't need to explain. Some things couldn't be captured in headlines or interviews. Some things existed only in the precise moment of truth when instinct, training, and courage collided. That was the story she carried, not for fame, not for glory, but for herself and for the lives she had silently vowed to protect. The passengers had begun to disperse, their faces etched with relief and awe. Families hugged tightly, tears mingling with rainwater and sweat. Somewhere, a child looked up at her with eyes wide, silently promising to never forget. That gaze was more meaningful than any applause, any accolade. In that instant, she felt a quiet triumph, not the kind shouted from billboards or social media, but the kind that settled deep in your chest, a recognition of your own power, your own resilience, your own unwavering resolve. The captain finally approached again, now composed, his earlier panic replaced by profound respect. "You saved everyone today," he said simply. She nodded, eyes calm. "We saved everyone. That's all that matters." There was a mutual understanding in that exchange, a recognition that in extreme moments, ego dissolves and what remains is raw humanity, sharpened to its finest edge. Night began to fall, the storm clouds breaking apart to reveal slivers of moonlight glimmering on wet asphalt. It was poetic in a way she could appreciate. Chaos followed by clarity, danger followed by calm, fear followed by awe. Life was a series of storms, each demanding your utmost attention, your deepest courage, and your most precise judgment. Tonight, she had navigated one. And though the world would call it miraculous, she knew the truth. It was mastery forged by discipline, patience, and unshakable resolve. As she walked back to the terminal, the murmurs of people behind her seemed almost distant, a soundtrack to a life that would never truly be ordinary again. Each person she had guided to safety would carry the memory of this flight forever, and in that, she found an unexpected solace. She had entered their lives quietly, unassuming, hidden among the passengers, and emerged a figure of legend, not by intention, but by necessity. The storm had passed, yet its echo lingered. She could feel it in the air, in the trembling of the last few passengers still on the tarmac, in the hum of the emergency vehicles, in the faint smell of wet asphalt and fuel. It was a reminder that danger is never far, that life is a constant negotiation between chaos and order, chance and skill, fear and courage. And she, in that fleeting moment, had tiptoed on the razor's edge and emerged unscathed, leaving behind a story that would ripple through lives, inspiring awe, gratitude, and reflection. For her, there would be no celebration, no speeches, no medals. The real victory was in the quiet aftermath, the knowledge that she had done what so few could, that she had transformed panic into control, fear into action, and chaos into a story of survival. The passengers would recount the event for years, perhaps exaggerating details, embellishing the drama, but they would never fully capture the inner precision, the calm intensity, the razor-sharp focus that had defined her every move. She paused for a moment, looking up at the sky, now clearing, the first stars peeking through. It was a silent acknowledgement, a covenant between her and the world she had just protected. Life was unpredictable, and death could strike without warning, but skill, courage, and clarity could tilt the balance, even against insurmountable odds. Tonight had been proof. Tonight had been a declaration. And as the passengers disappeared into the night, their chatter fading into echoes, she allowed herself a rare, deep exhale. The adrenaline ebbed, leaving only a profound awareness. She had answered a call few would ever recognize, few would ever understand. She had been ordinary, invisible even, one among many, yet in a single moment, she had become extraordinary. The runway was empty now, lights flickering gently in the aftermath of chaos, and she knew that the story didn't end here. It was only a chapter, one that would follow her, shape her, and haunt her in equal measure. Because once you've faced death with skill as your only shield, once you've guided others safely through storm and terror, nothing is ever quite the same again. And somewhere, in the quiet corners of the night, she allowed herself a fleeting smile. Not for recognition, not for glory, but for the rare and unrepeatable knowledge that she had been the line between life and oblivion, that in a world of chaos, she had been the calm, the precision, and the courage. That was the story worth telling, the story that would linger in memory long after headlines faded, a story of a hero unseen until the moment the world demanded everything, and she gave it.